Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Good Girls. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have Beth wearing a wire, but then Rio doesn't show up, and now she's kind of getting paranoid about it. And that's the effed up thing that, like, oh, we're going to protect you, you know, Secret Service and all that. And she's like, oh, so that means you'll take a bullet for me. And Phoebe's like, he will. But also, it's just like how nonchalant they are about it. Because like, oh, the transmitter's not working. So maybe he did figure this out. And she's like, wait, why are you still like, oh, well. And it's like, no, get my husband out of prison. It's like, no, that's not what our deal was. You have to get us more. And it's like, that's not my fault. She's like, and they're like, it kind of is. And he bounce. And Phoebe's like, don't worry about it. The transmitter, they kind of get a little hazy and messed up sometimes. It's like in that moment, them leaving her high and dry, he might potentially know what's what. He might be ready to kill me. And you guys are just so... let's move on type of situations. I can understand why Beth is kind of freaking out because it's like, if he didn't show up, that means he's suspicious and stuff like that. Eventually, later on, he shows up at her place and he has like the transmitter, and he shows up at her place and she's like, oh, yeah, Dean hides a whole bunch of junk food. He just kind of tells her to hush and then has her strip. And then it's like, well, you better watch your back, and leaves. And I thought it was interesting because even Annie was like, that's interesting. And it's like, what? It's like, yeah, it looks very 90s. You'd think it'd be a little more high-tech, something a little sleeker. And I wonder, is there something more to that? Is that supposed to be from the fact is that they're not as well-funded as you think they are? Or is that supposed to be like, oh, because this isn't a movie, because this is a real life, it's not as, like, glamorous as you thought? Because it did seem kind of old school. It might be the fact is they might have cheaped it out and used a cheap model. Maybe that's also how he found it because it's a very old school model rather than a more like that in itself might be what that's supposed to represent because they made such a point to point that out. So I don't know. That could just be me reading too much into it, but there's a little back and forth about it, so that means they kind of wanted you to take note of that. So nothing really came about it, but that's what I'm wondering if that's supposed to mean. It's like, yeah, they kind of cheaped out, and they're like showing you how they're just kind of like, oh, we're doing almost, it feels like they're doing the bare minimum to kind of do their job, interestingly enough, you know? I even love Ruby telling her that story about like, oh yeah, someone kind of in a similar circumstance. And it's like, yeah, he shot her, put her in a suitcase, and she was his carry-on. And it's like, and Beth's almost like, why are you even telling me this? Is it supposed to make me feel better? Because it's not, you know? Because at the very least, Ruby's like, at the bare minimum, he's suspicious. Whether he knows or not, the bare minimum, he's suspicious, so... Which, speaking of Ruby, in this episode, we have her kind of, suspicious of Stan because it's like, right, he hasn't told her anything about the Jean situation. I guess more so than anything because he knows if he told her the truth. Like, for him, it's like, I got to handle this. But also, I think he felt like he didn't want to guilt her into it because she would feel extremely bad if she knew, like, what he was having to do. So I think for his own sake, and for her sake, he was just like, I'm going to handle this, I'm going to do it. He figured it'd probably be like a couple jobs, maybe here and there, do my thing, and I'm done. Obviously, not the case at all. Considering where she currently stands with Rio, it should kind of make sense. That actually comes up conversation later on because it's like, oh, for how long? It's like, how long you in it for your guy? And it's like, yep, Ruby pretty much got the answer the moment that got, asked to her. But, yeah, she knows that Stan's lying because she's like, yeah, I'm eating the food. She's like, oh, let me drop by with the sauce. No, it's good. Oh, it's good. He's like, She's like, yeah, okay. And then it's like she was at the strip club. And I love that she's driving away. The guy was like, hey, but if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind that sauce. And so she just hands it to him. I love that he continues just to eat Stan's food like it's his. But at the same time, you have Annie looking after Nancy's Dakota, which I love that whole situation because of, Ben was initially being like, no, I'll do it because Nancy had no one to look after her kid. And then you have like... because Ben was like, oh, I could have Alex bring me my homework. And you have Annie being like, I'll do it. And they're like, quiet for a bit. And she's like, but Alex is at school. She's like, no, I mean, look after Dakota. And then there's that deafening silence of, what? It's like, and for her to be like, whoa, you guys don't think I can do it? It's like, yeah. She's like, I raised you. And Ben's like, barely. That's the sad thing. He's saying that jokingly, but it's a backhanded comment. Like he says that because it's like, oh, me and my mom had that type of relationship. But it's also that thing of, I think Ben doesn't realize like how the heart Annie's taking a lot of that. Like a lot of his recent developments of like it makes her question herself as a mother, and Ben doesn't mean that, but it's just like that's always been the relationship that they've had. So it's a situation of like, oh, just like I said, it seems very backhanded, and it's just like, oh, it's But she's like, come on, like I can take care of the baby for like a day. Immediately things aren't working out. I love that she has to, it's like, whoa, why are you bringing the baby here? And it's like, oh, she's like, and she doesn't want to give Dakota the pacifier because it's like, no, this is a game of like war, and it's like, I'm not going to let this baby win. Ruby comes over, grabs the pacifier, put it in the baby's mouth, and it's like, oh, that was settled. So Rio's dude shows up, and he's like, oh, like, and like he comes in, and I love that he comes in like the nanny. I guess another example of what I'm trying to think of is like Vin Diesel from The Pacifier, which is a weird movie to reference because I've never seen that movie all the way through. I've seen fragments of it, but I've never seen the movie all the way through. But he kind of comes in like that, and he's just kind of like taking care of the baby, and it's like, oh yeah, the baby's hungry and stuff like that. It's like, we learned not too long ago that he's a parent, but I mean, to be fair, everyone else in that room is a parent, but it's been a while. It's kind of interesting that like, hey, I mean, that's the thing of like, yeah, just because he's part of a gang and he's a criminal doesn't mean he doesn't know how to take care of a baby, you know? That's wrong on your part to kind of be surprised by that, but that's supposed to be the part about it is that it's so surprising. But, which actually makes you wonder, it's like, well, we see what Rio's like with his kid, you know? So it's like, family is important under these circumstances, criminal or not. Like, once again, every criminal's got, even the most hardcore criminal, probably turns into a big softy around their own kid, So I think that's just something to keep in mind. But it's like, yeah, so we got to go. And Beth's like, I can't. And they're like, why can't she? It's like, and Annie's like, she has to look after the kid. And he looks at Ruby. He's like, what about you? And Ruby's like, my kids are grown. He was like, well, this won't be any fun. And I love he's putting a baby in the middle and he's setting up the middle. She's like, why don't you just put it on the sides? And he's like, are you on crack? The middle's the safest place. I'm like, it's actually kind of adorable how serious he's taking this and stuff like that. Even later on, it's like, can you turn the heat off? It's like Arizona here. It's like, nah, little guy likes to keep it warm. He doesn't sleep. And it's like, honestly, he hasn't woken up. It's like he's on top of that. Even later on, it's like, damn, Nancy wants to FaceTime. He's like, come here. She's like, right. Oh, so I'm going to give you the phone so you so you can see some stranger with her child, with the whole tattooed face, I love that. But I also love he's the one that threw it out there because she's like, oh, Stan, why is he lying? It's like, oh, you know why. And him and Annie are immediately on the same page. But Annie's like, no, like, around all those strippers and stuff like that. And he basically put it in her head. She's like, wait, there's no way. You don't know my husband. And he's like, yeah, you're totally right. And it's like, it started getting in her head that maybe Stan is cheating on me. Like, she starts second guessing. We immediately, as the audience, knows, like, oh, that's not the case. He was supposed to meet up with some lady because Gene's like, oh yeah, I love it. He's like, yeah, you're funny, you're handsome, you're actually in good shape. Do you go to the gym? He's like, yeah, whenever I can. And it's like, he made it sound like, oh, I want you to go up there and like almost play escort boyfriend experience this lady because I need to set up a business deal. Where we never got to see those conversations, so it was probably very platonic and nothing happened. Because Stan was immediately like, I'm married, but I think it's just like, I think all he had to do was like show up and be his charming self, and that was supposed to be enough, or at the very least show up in like I said, a more boyfriend experience of without the sex stuff. Kind of, like I said, play a little bit of an escort role in a sense of just kind of be eye candy and be engaging in type of situation. And apparently it kind of works out based on what we see later on. But we don't know if anything happened. Like, if it were the case, I doubt Stan would say anything. I think he'd be a little more guilty later on if that were the case. I think it's like nothing happened. It was probably just a platonic thing of like, oh, she's like, oh, you're probably like, oh, you're so funny. And he was able to kind of, charm her into, making a deal with Gene. But regardless, I love Beth is in there being like trying to find out, okay, what's going on. Well, I'm the banker, and how that rolls out. I love how they cut between that and Eric's situation. That's so damn good. Because obviously Dean's being pessimistic by being like, oh yeah, like, oh, my wife, she's not going to get me out of here anytime soon. She's probably banging her tattooed boyfriend. It's like, it's such a shame because like, obviously they haven't hooked up, which is actually interesting because like, he still doesn't know about right. There's the hitman that was super into your wife wanting to like whisk her away. But then she set him up so that her, in your mind, tattoo lover ended up killing him. So, which is also sad too, because like you will never know to the length she went for you. But the argument could be, well, you could have gone to those lengths a little sooner. Like, let's not forget, this is the man that shot me and everything. You know, you could have not gotten in business with him. And there's a whole lot I'm sure Dean would have a conversational piece about. But like I said, I love that like Eric is there for him, being like, oh yeah, I got this new job and everything. He's like, my boss is a dick, and it's like, oh, can't be worse than Gail. And the moment he looks up, I was like, don't tell me. He's like, even Dean was like, no. She's like, yeah, who else would hire me? It's like, you're back working for Gail. It's like, oh yeah. It's like, oh man, that's gotta suck, especially after her business got. I mean, it still gotta suck, like, because after like she got the boot at her own business, and then like, oh. It just, poor Eric, because Gail is a nightmare. But nevertheless, I just thought that was so interesting. And it's like, don't worry, Dean, I'm gonna get you the $100,000. It's like, how you going to pay my bill? You live in a basement with a roommate. And then like he beats him at checkers, and he was like, don't get comfy in here. And I was like, what is Eric going to do? And he proceeds to rob a store. And I guess like the guy was like, give me that baseball bat. I guess he was planning on selling it. And the dude has it in his hand. I'm like, is that going to go the way I think it is? At the end of the episode, I'm going to skip right to it for a little bit. I was so hoping like, oh, Eric, please tell me Eric's going to stand outside and had gotten you out. Because I thought that'd be so funny and that'd be so awesome, because that's just going to make Dean resent Beth a little bit more, that it ended up being Eric getting him out. But then we see Eric sitting beside a trash can with a black eye. I was like, no! That guy beat the shit out of him with the bat. Which is I'm sure in moments like this, Eric does wish he was invisible. Well, I guess that kind of goes along with what he said, like, well, people don't notice me, I'm kind of invisible. I guess this is one of those instances of just like, yeah, you were not threatening at all, so I'm gonna beat the shit out of you. It's like, you felt so bad for Eric because he was trying to help out his best friend. He called Dean his best friend and everything. It's just, you actually felt sad. Like I said, there's a part of me that's like, it'd be funny, but in a heartwarming way, I would also appreciate it if Eric was the one that ended up getting him out of prison. But regardless. But circling back to Beth, I love, like, it's like, oh, she has to show up and be like, I'm the banker. And it just, like, hard cut to her just doing it over and over again. And then getting more and more confident. Oh, me? The banker. I'm the banker. Might have heard of me. I'm the banker. So on and so forth. I'm the banker, bitch. And the last lady's like, wait, what? She's like, I'm the banker. It's like, is that supposed to mean something? Like, who's the owner? My mom, she's sick. Which, on some level that affected Beth, because it was like, right, her and Annie's mom being sick and everything. So it affected, but obviously for Beth, it's like, well, this is self-preservation mode right now. So I am a little sensitive to your circumstances, but it's also like, this is my circumstances. I'm kind of answering to my employer, which your mom owes him some money. And the lady was kind of being a very smart ass with her and stuff like that, which I'm like, to be fair, it's not Rio. If it was Rio or Rio's dude, probably be that conversation would have went down way differently without it coming to that. Or it might have been a situation when they're like, oh, they would have probably immediately went to the gun situation. Beth had to leave and then come back to get to the gun situation. She was actually kind of pretty badass when she was like, oh yeah, this and this about the gun. It's like, oh yeah, like after kind of threatening her, it was like, all right. And then pulls out the clip and loads it into the gun. It's like, okay, watch your back and all that. So that was pretty interesting. Once again, that's the thing about, despite what she says, Hitman was kind of right. There's no going back to a normal life because Beth loves this too much. She'll never, she can admit it from time to time, but other times she's like, I just want to help my husband. It's like, no, if you could, and you guys did for a while, you kind of ran things for a while, and she enjoys it. She loves the power because it's something she's good at, and she doesn't want to go back to ever just being a normal wife anymore. She made that pretty damn clear. Was that last episode that conversation came up? So it is a thing of she doesn't ever want to go back to being just a regular wife again. Like she does, even though she was saying that just to lure Rio into doing that, like it's still a thing of, it's still true. That was her kind of speaking from the heart because she enjoys it too much. She loves being the boss. But obviously she's meeting with Rio. And it becomes that conversation about the money. And she's like, no, I got that ready. And it's like, all right. So for him, it's like, oh, no, you think you're done? This is actually just the beginning. She's like, why? He's like, because I've got to lay low. And she's like, but why do you want me to do this? Like, shouldn't we be laying low in general? Because someone could be watching. He's like, yeah, but if they're watching, it's just you doing stuff, not me. So it's that thing kind of implying like maybe he knows. But even if he doesn't know, once again, the deniability that that layer of protection, because it's like, yeah, you're the one doing all the shady stuff. If anything happens, you get busted, not me. So it shows that it's like, once again, Rio's smarter than he lets on. Like, because he kind of like, oh yeah, that guy didn't seem like Secret Service to me, blah blah blah, you know, Hitman last episode. So I'm like, it's hard to say what he knows, you know, but he has an inkling. But I think he's trying to give Beth just enough rope to hang herself. I mean, we saw what happened to the last, like, law enforcement that tried to take him down. Turner was kind of like, once again, I believe it was Agent Turner, kind of screwed himself over by, he should have never saved Rio, and then never put Rio in a position where it's like, oh, it just gave Rio the time to bite his time until it was time to strike. So it might be this situation where he's trying to he's testing Beth's loyalty, but also he probably knows, like, I know. I mean, they were sitting in a restaurant, like, Beth kind of gave them a signal, like, no, don't come talk to me, like, this is what's going down. So they sat nearby where it's like, yeah, I want you kind of mixed up in this because, you know, I have people I have to answer to. They want to meet you, which is like, now that's interesting, because we have not really touched on Rio's side of things. Like, Rio's as far as the puck is going for us, so it's gonna be interesting to find out who his bosses are. Like, it is interesting. We are in season 4, and, you know, even if we were to go by the original pacing of the show, I'd assume we'd still be like here, you know, because once again, I think this would have been like the true beginning of season 4, if it wasn't, you know, if everything wasn't shut down prior. So I think this would have been like season 4's like the real season 4's premiere. So it's like 4 seasons, and this might be our first opportunity to see who Rio works for. You'd assume it'd be like maybe some cartel. You don't know. I mean, it could still be a cartel. It could just be like a rich billionaire that's mixed up with it. You don't know, like, how deep. Like, that's the thing. We've only seen, because obviously the whole point of the show is Beth, Ruby, and any side of things, and kind of, you know, the person they have to answer to Rio. Like, because it's so interesting too. Like, he's legitimately middle management. They've constantly, he's been the main antagonist, their biggest threat for three full seasons, going into a 4th season of being their biggest threat, and he's just middle management. That's like, I was about to say, like, I guess the closest, well, because I think, wasn't Gus technically middle management in Breaking Bad? Because, like, they were, like, Gus was trying to get in bed with other people just because, obviously, it was, like, long-term, it was a whole thing, but even Gus, to a certain extent, wasn't even, like, he was his own thing, but he was also kind of middle management level. It's that type of thing where it's like, I figured Rio wasn't the whole operation, but still, it's just kind of crazy, like, this long for us to get to that point. Which I think that's kind of, like I said, I just think that's so interesting because it's kept Rio being this opposing, threatening force for so long, you know? But regardless, so now Beth is kind of in the clear on that front. Now that she's gotten a step closer, she was able to get Dean out of prison. So that worked out in that regard. But him being like, what'd you have to do? So I'm curious how much she's going to fill him in on what's going down. Probably have to make it a little clear about everything. Granted, their relationship's definitely not going to be the same because it's like, right, the fact is he's even thinking like, oh, you're not going to get me out of prison because you're too busy banging your tattooed boyfriend. That's a whole thing. So we'll see. There was even that line from him being like, you are my girl after all. You are my girl, right? So he means that more platonically because I'm sure, if it came down to that, I'm sure he wouldn't mind, but he also won't get that close to Beth ever again because he doesn't trust her. How can you trust a woman that tried to kill you, you know? So there's that whole situation. But other than that, there's Annie. She was able to clean the place up, and Nancy comes over and is like, oh, everything's fine. Oh, when's the last time you changed it? I just changed them just now. And then, like, the diaper situation. I won't lie to you. I 100% agree with Annie. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you keep that if it's a baby cream that doesn't work, then why keep it even as an emergency? Because, like, to me, it's a situation where, I'm being hypercritical, but I agree with Andy. It didn't make any sense to get pissed at her about it because it's like, wait, why give me 2 creams if one of them doesn't work? It's like the other one's a backup, but it's like, for me, if you ran out of the original cream that she's supposed to use and you had to use the backup, we'd be here anyway. I guess it'd be a little bit better because you had no choice but to use it. But I'm like, if that's the case, why not have a second bottle of the cream that does work? Why have wouldn't no baby cream be better than using the one that ended up giving him a rash anyway? I don't know. I mean, maybe rash is better. The rash from the not good cream is better than no cream. And once again, I've not dived into like that whole thing, so I have no idea. Like, you know, I'm not a parent, so I've never had to deal with that. But I'm like, that just, like I said, I felt like Nancy was just nitpicking, because it's like, oh, like he's got, you know, a rash on the sack and everything, which, you know, and you felt bad for Andy, because Andy was like, I was just trying to do, like, you know, wanted to do something right. And she's like, why? Like, why was it so important to you? It's like, just to know that I could, because I think for Andy, she's just been down on herself lately, thinking like, oh, like if I can do this one thing, that means I'm not the screw up that everyone, including my own son, thinks I am, you know? And I even been coming in, whoa, like, I didn't even know you had a floor. She's like, it's wood, right? I know. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, yeah, Nancy said, it's like, oh, what did Nancy say? She said, yeah, Dakota loved you and you were awesome. And she's like, cool. You know, like, I think Annie needed that. So there's that. Then you have Ruby discovering, like, you know, going through Stan's stuff and finds a purse in the back. And then she's drinking and then pulls out the purse. It's like, oh, does it look good on me? And it's like, all right, yes. It's like, you think I'm stepping out on you? And she's like, you're tired, the glitter and stuff like that. And then finally he was like, yeah, I'm covering for you. And she's like, what about insurance? It's like, for Gene, it's not about money. It's like, what is? Like, doing what he wants me to. So how long is that going to last? You know, so it's also like, hey, you like that purse? Yeah, it looks nearly perfect. Good. Go ahead and take it. There's about 300 more after that. So their circumstances are complicated, because it's like, hey, Stan's got his own, not the same thing. Now, if we could, that'd be interesting if we end up getting both sides meet. It's like, hey, you got a criminal and I got a criminal. Let's get we already got one criminal to take care of the hitman we hired to take care of the criminal. Because if they killed Rio, obviously that would screw over Dean's circumstances. So it's just, you know, it's interesting how that works. But I'm wondering if they can like cross paths in that, and that kind of, you know, it's like, oh, hook Gene up with Rio, and then maybe Gene will be less likely to pay attention to Stan, because it's like, oh, new I don't know why he said a new lane of revenue or something like that. I'd be so curious to see if they could do something about that. I won't lie to you, when he was saying like, oh yeah, like when he's first like, oh, I got to meet with someone, I thought he was going to be like, wait, are we going to find out that they actually have a connection, that Gene is meeting here with Rio or something like that? But it ended up being someone else. I'm curious to find out who that someone else is. Is that going to become a big player? Is that actually going to turn into something where it's like, yeah, Stan will have to kind of go above and beyond for this particular job? Maybe not. It seems like the dealings are already done, but it could be a thing of she really likes Stan, so Gene sends him more and more, and she's like, and it gets a little flirty and complicated considering he's married. It's going to be interesting. Especially, I'm curious what Ruby's going to do now that she knows, because he was the one to be like, oh, because Gene was like, oh, if you want me to, I could get your wife involved and she can pay off her debt. So I'm curious what's going to happen on that front. Like, is she going to try and shift Gene's mind? Maybe Rio might be the middle ground she needs to kind of make that happen. Maybe, maybe not. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. Maybe I avoided watching the previews, so I don't know what's happening. If you don't know, I always try to avoid watching the previews. I avoided watching the previews, so I don't know if we're going to meet Rio's bosses next episode or not. That's going to be interesting whenever we finally do, whether it's next episode or not. But I'm just curious in general where all of this is going to take us going forward. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.